Take a little trip with me, I'm gonna take you home.
Take a little history
Take a little
down this lane of memories.
down this lane.
So let's raise another glass for the glorious past and the friends we have become. Yeah, yeah, 'cause little did we know the good times come and go, but the best is yet to come.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. It's no secret the Congress party is in crisis, but what's perplexing and inexplicable is no one seems to be doing anything about it. With me to talk about the predicament facing his party is former Minister of Information and Broadcasting and Congress Lok Sabha MP for Anandpur Sahib in Punjab, Manish Tewari. Manish Tewari, I want to explore your thoughts about how Congress's philosophy and its ideology need to adapt to the changed circumstances of today. But first, let me raise with you an issue that's been all over the front pages for the last week. It's almost exactly 9 months since Rahul Gandhi resigned as Congress president, and yet your party hasn't found a replacement, and no one knows how long the interim arrangement under Sonia Gandhi will continue. And nothing could be more damaging to the image of a political party than this. How do you explain this situation?
Well, Karan, you are absolutely correct that Mr. Rahul Gandhi was elected for a 5-year term in 2017. So his term would have continued till 2022. But post the Lok Sabha debacle in 2019, he chose to take responsibility and step down. And according to me, this is one of the rare occasions when somebody has actually said that, look, stuff has happened under my watch, rather than pass on the responsibility to somebody else, I take it on my chin and I step down. We had a hiatus for about 2 months after that. And then in the August of 2019, the Congress Working Committee unanimously decided that Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, who had ably led us for 20 years, would be the interim president. And that's where we've been currently since the August of 2019.
And 7 months have passed and you haven't got any shape or direction about getting a new leader. And it's a very strange position for a party to be in. You don't have a leader and no one seems to be doing anything about it.
If I were to put it differently, it seems, and I can speak for a very large body of congressmen, that people are actually quite happy and satisfied with the leadership of Mrs. Sonia Gandhi. So therefore, interim or permanent is a matter of semantics, but in terms of substance, I can speak for a very wide body of Congress people that a lady who very ably led us for over 2 decades, when she was put back at the helm of affairs, there was a palpable sense of relief and satisfaction across the Congress rank and file.
So are you saying to me that you don't need an immediate full-fledged president, that you're happy for the interim arrangement under Sonia Gandhi to continue almost indefinitely?
Well, as I earlier pointed out to you, that interim or permanent is a matter of semantics. The fact is that I don't think people are really unhappy, unsatisfied with the leadership of Sonia Gandhi because, and let me explain that to you, that the only real success that the Congress party's had over the past 15 years is when she twice led us into government in 2004 and 2009.
So the present arrangement, which she calls interim, can actually, in your eyes, continue indefinitely. You're quite happy with it.
Well, she does not call it interim. Constitutionally, it's an interim arrangement.
But you're happy for it to continue?
Well, in the sense, I am only reflecting the opinion of a very wide body of people.
Is it your opinion as well?
Well, Karan, and I said this earlier in one of my interviews, that individuals or leadership is not the sum total of everything that a political party requires.
But at the moment we're talking about leadership, so let's stick to that, and I'll come to ideology later. Are you, Manish Tewari, happy for this present situation where Sonia Gandhi is an interim leader continuing indefinitely?
To put it very bluntly and to answer your question straight off, I don't think it's a bad idea if Mrs. Sonia Gandhi were to continue for a while.
Two of your colleagues in the Congress party today in the Indian Express have actually said the opposite. Shashi Tharoor has said, and I'm quoting, "We do need to find ourselves a new president and we need to do so without any further delay." Abhishek Singhvi has gone one step further and actually said that there's a particular process by which it should be found, including finding new leaders in the states as well. So these are two people who clearly aren't happy with this interim arrangement.
Well, I can't speak on behalf of either Shashi Tharoor or Dr. Abhishek Singhvi, but as someone who's now spent over 4 decades in the Congress party, if I may say longer than both Dr. Singhvi and Shashi Tharoor even put together, a very, very substantive body of Congress people are in fact quite satisfied with the arrangement as it exists today.
But clearly, if Shashi Tharoor and Abhishek Singhvi and earlier Sandeep Dixit are saying something else, this suggests that Congress is split over this issue. People like you believe that the present arrangement can continue indefinitely, but there are others who believe you need a full-fledged president and you need it now. So Congress is split.
Well, Karan, how are you going to really get a full-fledged president? You are going to get a full-fledged president if tomorrow the AICC was to meet and then either ratify the interim arrangement which put Mrs. Sonia Gandhi as the Congress
Or
president.
set in motion a process of elections.
Or elect a new president. But I think there are certain things which need to be done prior to that.
Which are?
Which is essentially going back to the basics. That is having a Panchmari 1.0, whereby the entire gamut of issues, ideological and leadership, which confront the Congress party, need to be discussed, debated, and agreed upon threadbare by a wider body of Congress leaders going across the length and breadth of India.
It's interesting that you're giving priority in your chronology to first sorting out the problems with the ideology and the philosophy of the Congress, and then you're saying after that's done, choose a leader. Most people say it should be the other way around because the qualities, the thinking, the character of the leader would influence what the ideology of the party becomes. You're saying it should be the other way around.
Well, as you know, I am one who has always believed and continues to believe that philosophy, ideology, and direction is 3/4 or maybe even 4/5 of what a political party is. And I find the emphasis on leadership a little overstretched, if I were to put it in those words.
But then let me quote you what the Hindustan Times, a Congress supporting paper, said in a leader of your party just about 3 or 4 days ago. These were the words: "What is happening in the Congress appears like anarchy." If one of your most solid supporting papers thinks the situation is anarchic, this is pretty damaging.
Well, Karan, first of all, I do not think there's any anarchy within the Congress ranks, but yes, there is concern which has been articulated in the public space by different publications. The Hindustan Times is one of them. But as I was earlier pointing out, if the intent is to revive the Congress party and make it into a cohesive and sharp instrument of opposition which the country currently requires, there are certain ideological conundrums which need to be resolved, as also the pathways with regard to leadership discussed threadbare.
And just to repeat, you're saying resolve the ideological conundrums, to use your phrase, first. After that, we will choose a leader. And after that, we will decide when we choose a leader whether you formalize Sonia Gandhi and make her the full-fledged leader and remove this interim nature, or you have an election to put another person in place.
What I'm saying is that there is a thinking process, a broad-based thinking process, which needs to be initiated. Something on the lines that we did in the September of 1998 in Panchmari after Mrs. Sonia Gandhi had taken over as the president. And in that particular Panchmari session of the Congress party or brainstorming of the Congress party, a large number of issues which ultimately led up to the Congress becoming the principal party in government in 2004 were actually clinched and
Except
decided.
that Panchmari happened after Sonia Gandhi became president. You're now actually envisaging the opposite, an equivalent of Panchmari happening first, and then the leadership issue being sorted out afterwards. You've got the reversed order.
Well, in the sense, at this point in time, I think that order really suits us much better because, as I was earlier pointing out, that the only two templates of victory that we've had in the last 2 decades is really Mrs. Sonia Gandhi leading us in 2004 and 2009. And that's why when she decided to come back or accept the request of the Congress Working Committee to head the party as an interim measure, I think there was a palpable sense of relief across the country.
And this is why you believe retaining her is such an important thing, because she's the only president in recent times that has delivered 2 occasions of power for Congress, 2004 and 9.
And also possibly the person best suited to keep the Congress party together.
Let me put to you 2 reasons why people say Congress is actually not taking critical steps to put a new president in place. The first is that there are many who hope that if you give him enough time, Rahul Gandhi will change his mind and come back. And therefore, what's the need to find a new leader? Because in another 3-4 months, he'll be back. And the opposite view is that a time has come 9 months after he resigned to accept his resignation and move on. Do you believe that this dilemma about give Rahul time and he'll come back is one reason why people are happy for this interim arrangement to continue?
I don't think so. I think Mr. Rahul Gandhi was fairly emphatic because A, nobody asked for his resignation, and B, as you're aware, there were many persuasive attempts, public and private, in order to get him to withdraw his resignation, which clearly he did not. He had thought it through and he decided to stick with it. Under those circumstances, at a point in time when we've suffered a second consecutive defeat in the Lok Sabha, everybody felt that Mrs. Gandhi would be the person best suited to hold the party together, and that situation persists even 9 months later.
A second explanation that is given why you haven't put a replacement president in place is given by Sandeep Dixit in an interview to the Indian Express, who says that senior leaders or several senior leaders are actually scared that the person chosen may be a rival. They don't want that. So let's continue with the interim arrangement indefinitely, because that's a lot better than one of our rivals getting the job.
Well, in a political party, there is always a contest for positions and power. And so therefore, ultimately, let us suppose if an electoral process was to play itself out, and hypothetically speaking, Mrs. Gandhi decides that she would not want to continue, or Mr. Rahul Gandhi decides that he would not want to come back, then obviously there would be some kind of an arrangement which would be put in place. And that arrangement would be to the liking of some people and the disliking of such people.
But is scare, as Sandeep Dixit called it, one reason why people are not actually starting an election process to replace Rahul Gandhi?
I don't think, Karan, that is correct.
So you don't agree with Sandeep?
I don't think that is correct. I think the overwhelming concern is that possibly, given the situation that we are in, she is the best suited person to keep the party together and even preside over the process of the revival of the party.
And the new Panchmari that you believe is an essential thing. My last question about leadership before I come to this question of ideology, at least 3-4 times you've said that there's an overwhelming consensus, those were your words, that Sonia Gandhi needs to be retained for the time being. Are you absolutely sure this is an overwhelming consensus?
Absolutely, Karan, because I joined the Congress party way back in 1981, and I worked my way up through the ranks of the party. There is hardly anybody at any level in the party whom I personally do not know.
And they all believe the same.
In my interactions with people across the board, especially those who make up the rank and file of the party across the country, there is a view that the Congress party needs a safe pair of hands, and she's the safest pair of hands that we have at this point.
This means that the voices that emerged in the press, Sandeep Dixit, Shashi Tharoor, even for that matter Abhishek Singhvi, are minority voices. They do not represent the broad swathe of Congress opinion.
Well, I would not like to sort of characterize it as opposing paradigms.
Use different language, but they don't represent the majority of Congress.
My sense of it and the conversations that I've had with colleagues who had worked with me in the NSUI, who had worked with me in the Youth Congress, colleagues who have grown up in the party like me and are now in leadership positions across the country, is that the party at this point in time, and I repeat at the risk of repetition, requires a safe pair of hands, and she is perhaps the safest pair of
But I'm
hands.
intrigued by the way you gave that answer. Colleagues who worked with you in the NSUI, colleagues who worked in the Youth Congress. What about MPs? You have just about 50. And what about senior leaders of the party? Do they also share your belief? Is there an overwhelming consensus amongst them that Sonia Gandhi must be retained for the time being, for the foreseeable future, in fact?
Well, I cannot talk about colleagues in the Rajya Sabha, but colleagues in the Lok Sabha that I have interacted with informally over the past so many months do hold the view which I have just articulated.
And are you talking of a majority of colleagues?
A majority of them.
A majority of the Lok Sabha.
majority of them.
So that's a majority of Lok Sabha MPs.
Yeah.
What about leaders of the party? Let's not name them, but the leaders of the party, the CWC, the general secretaries, are they also of this opinion?
Well, overwhelmingly, yes.
Again, a majority.
Overwhelmingly, yes, because if the case would have been to the contrary, Karan, you would have seen far more public articulation than what you've really been seeing. So therefore, what you call the silent majority in politics.
Want Sonia to continue.
And I'm talking about the silent majority in the Congress party actually wants Mrs. Gandhi to continue.
Manish Tewari, let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I want to explore what is in some ways, as you say, a more important issue. The manner in which the philosophy and ideology of the Congress party needs to adapt to the circumstances of today. But first, a message from our sponsor Glenlivet, whilst I take a reassuring sip from this glass.
Take a little trip with me, I'm gonna take you home.
Take a little history
Take a little
down this lane of memories.
down this lane.
So let's raise another glass for the glorious past and the friends we have become. Yeah, yeah, 'cause little did we know the good times come and go, but the best is yet to come.
Welcome back to a special interview for The Wire. My guest is former Information and Broadcasting Minister and the Congress Party's MP for the Lok Sabha from Anandpur Sahib in Punjab, Manish Tewari. Manish Tewari, in part one, we talked about the leadership issue. Let's now come in part two to your thoughts about how Congress needs to amend its philosophy and ideology to come in more in line with the circumstances of today. And to begin with, I want to raise the critical issue of the fact that in so many areas that are today important or contentious, people aren't at all clear about what Congress thinks. Let's start with secularism. It's a major talking and debating point in Indian politics. Do you believe there is a need for Congress to carefully, explicitly articulate what it means by secularism?
I absolutely believe that that is very important, Karan. And the reason why I believe so is, if you were to rewind all the way back to the Constituent Assembly, the founding fathers of our Constitution, people who had led us during the independence movement, in my estimation, actually imported a classical Western concept called secularism and deliberately inserted it into the design of the Constitution because they believed that in a deeply religious country like India, the state needed to be completely agnostic. So the separation of the church and the state that they envisaged was needed to be absolute. Over a period of time, when we reinterpreted secularism to mean Sarv Dharam Sambhav, that is respect and tolerance for all religions, I think we started down a slippery slope. And therefore, when you start practicing tolerance and respect for all religions as a part of your public policy, then somebody can draw the line here, while somebody can draw the line even to the far right.
And you need the line drawn more clearly and explicitly.
Oh yes, absolutely, because I think the time has come for the Congress party to really study the Nehruvian concept of secularism. What was the thinking when Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and his colleagues actually put secularism into the design of the Indian Constitution, and then extrapolated to the situation as it stands today, where there has been a perceptible shift to the right as a country over the past 5 years, and see as to how best we can adapt that definition of secularism to the circumstances that prevail today.
You're saying 2-3 very important things. First, you're saying the redefinition of the original constitutional Nehruvian and Ambedkarite concept of secularism as Sambhav has actually led to a certain blurring of the lines, and you believe that that is dangerous. You need a much more explicit separation between church and state, which is what Nehru had in mind, and we need therefore to return to the more rigid Nehruvian Ambedkarite definition, because the one that's replaced it is a more nebulous one, and therefore it blurs the lines and it becomes more easily abused.
So let me crystallize it. The first part of your articulation is absolutely correct, that we need to return to the Nehruvian Ambedkar definition of secularism. The second part of it is more tricky, that since the ground has shifted to the right, how do we reinterpret or how do we apply that definition to the current state of the polity?
What's your answer?
Well, I don't have a clear answer, and that's why when I suggest Panchmari 1.0, these are exactly the issues which need to be fleshed out and discussed threadbare.
So what you're saying is, in the first instance, we need to go back to the Nehruvian Ambedkarite definition. Then you need a Panchmari style meeting to work out how that definition will apply to the altered circumstances of today.
Oh, absolutely, because ultimately, you see, you are not dealing with political theory in the abstract. You are dealing with a living concept of secularism, which has to be articulated and applied to both the political and the electoral reality.
It's not the articulation that's the problem, it's the application.
Application, which is important. So because ultimately you have to apply it to both the electoral and the political paradigm. So therefore,
thinking off the top of my head, if you go back to the original Ambedkarite Nehruvian concept of a rigid and strict separation between church and state, then things like lighting lamps at functions, which has a sort of Hindu connotation, or paying for Hajj pilgrimages, all would be ruled out. There would be no involvement of the state in any form of funding of religion, of paying for temple priests, or paying for imams. There would be a complete separation.
Well, Karan, you are absolutely 100% correct. And in many countries around the world, especially in the West, this rigid separation of the church and the state in terms of religious activity is still very strictly applied. And those countries perhaps have been far, far more successful in really being able to assimilate, imbibe, and carry their multi-ethnic diversity along.
And the danger of the reinterpretation as Sarvdharma Sambhav is that we've slid into the right, we've blurred the lines, and we need now to go back to the old strict enforcement, because that is the only way we can ensure that religiosity of the right wing doesn't infuse our politics.
That's my view. That's my view, and I, as someone who's tried to apply his mind as deeply as possible, I think that is a return to the roots, a return to the original classical definition of secularism is imperative, and I do not believe that secularism was the continuum of some 1,000-year-old Indian tradition.
No, it's an import.
It was a classical Western import that was deliberately engrafted into our constitutional design, because the founding fathers realized that in a deeply religious country like ours, in a very spiritual ethos that we have, there had to be a strict separation of the church and
In
the state.
fact, one of the reasons why this reinterpretation of secularism happened is because of the belief that somehow secularism was part of a 1,000-year-old Indian tradition, and as you're saying, it wasn't. If you view it as that, you naturally slide towards Sambha. But if you actually accept what you're saying, that it is an import and you need to maintain it as such, then this strict application will continue and follow.
Oh, absolutely. In the sense, I guess we went down a slippery slope when we tried to reinterpret the vision of the founding fathers, and possibly, again, given the political context, some people found it expedient or convenient or necessary to do so, but where we've ended up as a result of that is
not where we want it to be.
Where we want it to be.
The second concept, where the Congress party looks as if it's out of sync both with the times and the mood of the country, is the concept of nationalism. We have a very clear idea what Mr. Modi and the BJP mean by nationalism. Would you accept most people aren't at all certain what Congress means by nationalism?
Well, that's exactly why we need to articulate our nationalism very, very forcefully. And I think it is important to make a distinction that majoritarianism does not mean nationalism. And nationalism is actually the country together, notwithstanding its multi-ethnic diversity, predicated upon the advancement of this nation. I can actually find better verbiology in order to define it, but there is a need to make this distinction very clear, that our brand of nationalism is not the majoritarianism which is being espoused. And I think even the right is now becoming uncomfortable with that, because if you read Mr. Bhagwat's statement, he says, do not use the word nationalism because it evokes...
Mr. Bhagwat is simply worried that it evokes memories of Hitler and Nazism, the word nationalism, but I'm not sure he's actually moved away from majoritarianism. He may still support majoritarianism, just use a different word, don't call it nationalism, because that reminds people of Hitler's Germany.
Well, but this is the starting point of discomfort, that if the right is also getting extremely discomforted by the manner in which nationalism and majoritarianism have become synonymous, the time has come for us to articulate an alternative vision of nationalism, which if I may say, actually steeped our body politic over the past 7 decades. The only thing is that it never needed to be articulated because it was something intrinsic in every Indian.
But there's a second challenge. Not only do you need to articulate it, but you need to ensure that it has a greater appeal than the majoritarian vision of Mr. Modi. That's the challenge. Not just finding an alternate version of nationalism, but ensuring it's more appealing.
Well, Karan, I think given that this interview is taking place as President Donald Trump is in India, I would like to point out that if you look at Barack Obama's interpretation of nationalism / patriotism, and he had defined it very, very cogently.
What was his definition?
Well, essentially that it is togetherness, and together we will rise, and together, we will build this nation, and it is not about putting up narrow walls between communities, and he said it very beautifully. I have not been able...
And you're saying that's the concept, and that's the language as well for Congress.
That is the concept, and that is the language for every liberal political party in the world.
Okay. A third issue is what you call a general revolt in this country, especially among the youth, against entitlement. And that's not just dynasty and the Gandhis, although that may come to everyone's mind first. It's actually basically Mr. Modi's concept of Lachan's Delhi, which he sometimes reduced to the Khan Market gang. What he's talking about is institutions and people who believe they have a right of privilege because of birth, entitlement because of who they are. And the sad part is, many people believe that Congress is identified with a belief in entitlement, with privilege and birth. How do you tackle this issue?
Well, Karan, you are absolutely correct. So between 2014 and 19, when I was not in Parliament, I traveled across the length and breadth of this country, especially to universities and colleges, talking to young people. And I found that there was a great amount of contempt for what, quote unquote, is called entitlement. And when I actually juxtapose it with the reality of the Congress Party, where young people in the NSUI and the Youth Congress today who occupy elected positions, unlike us when we were there who were unelected, for the lack of a better word, are actually third or fourth generation congressmen, and who come and tell me that his father or his mother had worked with me in the NSUI or the Youth Congress. So therefore, there are these legacies, and these legacies actually steep the Congress Party and maybe many other political structures. Now the question is this entitlement or is this legacy? And therefore, I think we as a political party have been unable to explain this, because when you look at the wider horizon outside the Congress, especially among the post-liberalization generation, that is 1991 onwards, there is a feeling that maybe because they had greater opportunity, that if you are able to sort of do it on your own, that counts for much more.
It's interesting that you drew from your own experience, and the examples were people from the NSUI that you've met during your travels between 2014 and 19 when you were not an MP. But in fact, for people who view Congress as I do, or as people do sitting and watching television or reading the papers, it smacks of entitlement when you hear of the pilots, the Sindhyas, the Dioras, the Jitin Prasads, the Karti Chidambarams, the Sandeep Dikshits, Kamal Nath and son, Gehlot and son, and there are several examples in almost every state. And the problem is many of these people have actually been elected on their own merit. They may be sons of someone, but they haven't actually got there because they're sons or daughters. They may have got an initial advantage, but thereafter they've been elected. But the image of enlightenment, of a party that confers privilege because of birth, sticks because of them. How do you handle this? You can't get rid of them. But the problem is, as long as they're there, they convey this image. Whether it's misleading or not doesn't matter. The image is what counts.
So if I was to put it jocularly, should all of them or all of us be really paying for the crimes of our parents? And the answer clearly is no. And that's why the Congress Party needs to make that distinction between entitlement and legacy. For example, if Mr. Jyotiraditya Scindia is Mr. Madhav Rao Scindia's son, the fact remains that Madhav Rao, when he unfortunately died in a plane crash, it was his 9th term in Parliament. Or if Mr. Jitin Prasad is the son of Mr. Jitin Prasad, he also had a long career in politics. And the same thing can be said about Mr. Rajesh Pilot or anybody else. And this is not a problem which is only or an issue which is only confined to these three. If you look at...
It spreads across the party.
Because we are a 135-year-old party.
Which is why the distinction between legacy and entitlement is one you have to make.
In fact, that is something which we have failed to make over all these years, that this is not entitlement, this is legacy, because these are people whose parents, whose grandparents, have contributed to the building of this nation, who have contributed to the freedom of this country, and so therefore they are not merely there because they are their father's sons or grandsons, but most of them have also in their own right been elected repeatedly to Parliament or the legislatures.
And it's only when you make that distinction between legacy and entitlement will you begin to start, and I'm phrasing myself carefully, begin to start convincing the country that you're not a party of entitlement. And only then will this image that Congress privileges birth recede. And only then will the young look upon you as a party that they want to join and that reflects their aspirations.
So therefore, Karan, the starting point is when you start making that distinction, first of all, you'll have to convince yourself that that is the correct distinction that you're making. And once you've convinced yourself, then I think you will be able to articulate it. And having made that distinction, if the Congress Party decides to draw that distinction, I think it's going to be a fairly tightrope walk, articulating it convincingly, but that is something which we have to do because
To convince yourself, I'm interrupting, you need another punch money, as you call it.
absolutely. These are the issues which need to be thought through extremely carefully because, as I was earlier pointing out, that in a 135-year-old party, at every level, you have people who are fourth, fifth generation in the Congress
Absolutely.
party.
Let me then come up with a fourth area where many people believe Congress needs to rethink its position, and that is to do with your economic philosophy. You are, after all, the party that in 1991 gave India economic liberalization and changed the growth trajectory of this country phenomenally. But that's not part of your message today. In fact, today, you don't even seem to acknowledge the globalization and the liberalization that you ushered in. Your message today is a very different one. Do you need to begin to adjust your economic philosophy to reflect the fact that you were the architects of liberalization?
Oh, absolutely, Karan. And I think therein lies the biggest conundrum. Because in 1991, when you oversaw the liberalization and the globalization of India's economy, it's another matter that today there's a great revolt against globalization, but we can come to that separately. You were never able to adjust your politics to that paradigm. Your politics continued to be essentially socialistic in character. And it is not just the liberalization of the economy took place. More importantly, the liberalization of the mind also took place. Because today you have 900 television channels, you have social media, which beams aspiration 24/7 into 900 million cable and satellite homes. And so therefore, when those are the kind of aspirations people have, and you give them socialistic prescriptions, there is a complete mismatch. So you have to reorient your economic message in order to identify with the aspirational India.
Then let me put it like this. I accept that India is not a rich country and poverty is a real problem. But equally, India is also a young country and it's an aspirational country. So instead of couching your message in terms of Garibi Hatao, shouldn't you couch it in terms of Amiri Bhadao?
Well, you are essentially re-echoing what Deng Xiaoping had said in 1976.
Absolutely.
When he reinterpreted the communist dogma and said it is glorious to be rich. And he said it doesn't matter what the color of the mice is, of the cat is, as long as it catches mice. So therefore, you're absolutely correct that we have a strange paradox whereby in India, inequality is growing. 1% of Indians actually own 73% of India's wealth. 101 billionaires have wealth which is equivalent to the entire revenue of the government of India for the last fiscal. At the same time, you have a hugely aspirational generation
In hundreds of millions.
Who want to have a better life and who want to be rich.
And the stress on Garibi Hatao doesn't attract them, it puts them off.
Well, in the sense, I don't think that it measures up to their aspirations. Their aspirations are much larger than just being at a subsistence
And
level.
this is the language, the rhetoric that Congress needs to not just speak, but before it speaks, it understand and reflect.
Absolutely. And I think maybe almost 3 decades post-liberalization, when unfortunately there is another revolt against globalization which is brewing and the world is coming back towards geographical proximities, and in fact that revolt against globalization is also responsible for the kind of nationalism that we see across countries. In India's context, given our aspirational population, you have to readjust
But this is very interesting. What you're advocating is that Congress thinking should catch up with Congress practice, except that it's catching up 30 years after Congress liberalized the economy. You should have caught up 30 years earlier.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I think in the initial years, there was an attempt to reorient that economic thinking, but I guess it was too much of an effort, and so therefore people decided, let the liberalization and the globalization play itself out, and the politics of it will catch up later. And this is not something which is confined to the Congress alone. If you look at the BJP, the kind of rhetoric
But
which
now
is,
you're saying we've waited 30 years, we need to catch up.
well, that's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, if you look at the BJP also, the kind of language which the Swadeshi Jagran Manch and some of these other people speak is almost very similar to the language which the Congress speaks on many of these
you
issues.
wrote a very interesting article for the Hindustan Times in December 2017 where you raised two very evocative critical questions. You said, should the Congress party not clearly delineate where it stands on the issue of personal wealth generated through legitimate enterprise or entrepreneurship? Is getting rich a glowing virtue or still a noxious vice?
Absolutely.
But 2 years have passed and your party hasn't answered your question.
Absolutely. And so therefore that's why when I talk about Panchmari, it is not to deflect from the leadership question, but to exactly deliberate on some of these issues, because I think the country requires an answer, because you have a lot of young people who are getting rich by legitimate means, startups and various other private initiatives.
What do you have to say to them?
What do you have to say
What
to
do you have
them?
to offer them?
Or do you frown upon them getting affluent, or do you accept, welcome, encourage, and will incentivize that legitimate and kosher path to prosperity?
Which is why Amiri Bhadao is what you should be talking about rather than Garibi Hatao.
Well, in the sense you've kind of paraphrased it in two words, but I think you got the essence of it right.
It's the deeper thinking.
It's just that it has to be said better.
So far, Manish Tewari, we've talked about the need for Congress ideology and philosophy to bring itself upfront and more in line with the way the country thinks or should think about secularism, nationalism, entitlement, and economic philosophy. There's one more issue I want to raise with you, and it's one that I imagine concerns all congressmen. It's quite clear that any time in any state your vote share falls below 20%, you become not just unimportant, but often irrelevant. It's happened in UP, Bihar, it's happened in Tamil Nadu, it's happened in Andhra, it's happened in Orissa, it's happened in Bengal, and now it could be happening in Delhi. And the truth is, this is not a new trend. It goes back to the time you lost power in 67 in Tamil Nadu. But as far as I can tell, 15 more years have passed and I don't know what Congress is doing about it.
Well, again, you're absolutely correct. So therefore, wherever a third party has been able to insert itself into the polity, or a regional party has sprung up,
disappeared.
The casualty has been the Congress. And number two, certain political parties have the ability to take far more out of coalitions politically than the Congress. Wherever we've got into a coalition, we've actually ended up second, or we've ended up losing out rather than being able to leverage those coalitions for our political benefit. So therefore, these are the questions which need to be thought through. And Delhi is a classical example, a city that the Congress governed for 15 years. Most of the transformation which we see in this city, and all of us and a bulk of the Congress leadership continues to live in this city, happened when Mrs. Sheila Dikshit was the chief minister.
And the people no longer give you credit for that.
But notwithstanding that, this is the third successive election that we've lost in Delhi. And it's a matter of concern that whenever you have the rise of a new entity or a regional player getting dominant, the casualty is always the Congress.
Are you hoping that the sort of Panchmari conclave that you're talking about, where you thrash out these issues of secularism, nationalism, entitlement, and economic philosophy, and then after that sort out the leadership vacuum, that this will somehow reverse the trend of Congress getting increasingly marginalized in states where third regional parties come up? Are you hoping that will happen?
Karan, this is not an instant coffee thing that you have one session and everything gets sorted out.
It will take a long time.
It is not a fourth generation antibiotic which is going to take care of all the ailments that you may have. You have to make Panchmari, and I use that as a cliche or as a colloquial term, a regular part of the Congress party building exercise, and have to every 6 months or 1 year keep reviewing your position, keep reviewing political developments as they take place, And I think that is the process of internal thinking, continuously updated, which will bring us into greater political relevance.
So you're suggesting the rethinking of the Congress's philosophy and ideology is not going to be something that's just settled in one conclave. It could go on for months, maybe even a year or two.
It has to be a continuous process. It has to be a continuous process. And I don't think some of these questions are going to get settled in only one session. But yes.
More importantly, it could take not just months, it could take a year and more.
Well, I think you have to make a beginning somewhere. And the beginning that we had made in Panchmadi in 1998 was a good beginning. And when we reviewed the exercise, or when we did it again in Simla in 2003, it helped the party. So therefore, if you have periodic exercises of these kinds, a large number of issues which are now being articulated in the public space would actually get articulated at these fora.
But something else follows from what you're saying. If the Panchmadi process, to just use that short form, is going to last for months or even a year or two, then the need for Sonia to continue, and let's leave out the terminology, whether it's interim or whatever, but the need for Sonia to continue means she has to be there till it ends. She's got to be there for the next year or two possibly.
Well, as I began this interview, Karan, by saying that a substantive majority of congressmen do believe that at the point where we are,
we need her.
This is the safest pair of hands that we can be in.
And for the foreseeable future.
And for the foreseeable future, you're absolutely correct.
Manish Tewari, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.